Okay, so at this point, I know this group is familiar with LockDown Browser, so we're going to start with adding the requirements for Monitor. And then certainly if there are any questions, if you'd like to take a step back, ask me anything else, please don't hesitate to do so. But this is actually my instructor level login. I'm logged in as Anna. And the course that I have instructor rights to is Geography 101. So once I access my course, underneath my course tools in the left-hand margin, I have access to my LockDown Browser link. Now, starting from the beginning, I know the group is probably familiar with this welcome screen, but one of the things that's also available to you within the screen is in this Getting Started tab, there's information for your syllabus and course description. Those of you that are LockDown Browser users probably have seen this before, you're familiar with it, but there's also a version of the syllabus that's applicable to when you're using LockDown Browser and Monitor. Now, what this adds to the equation for you is more information on best practices when your students are taking assessments remotely. So it is the recommended version of the syllabus that you might want to take advantage of. And certainly, you can update it as you see fit to reflect more of the course information from the syllabus perspective. A couple of other reminders, just in terms of the resources, you have access to quick start guides here. So if faculty prefer to have static documentation, this will walk you through how to use LockDown Browser and Monitor as well. So there's more information here.
So Anna, those pages you're showing us, when we go in through our system, we don't get those. It just takes us straight into LockDown Browser without the welcome information and help information that you're showing us.
I'm wondering if the faculty have checked the don't show this page again, and possibly because maybe they walked through the resources once and they've checked that box.
Okay.
So I would recommend, especially if it's the first time using Monitor, for the faculty member, making sure, so if you have a different set of faculty that are using the application, so for example, online faculty, if they've never used LockDown Browser before, they're probably going to see this welcome screen.
Can you reactivate it?
And we might want to add this to our Blackboard help as well.
Yeah, so I'm in our system. You can access it. It brings up LockDown Browser, and then on the right it says About LockDown Browser, and if you click on that, it brings up the page that Anna's showing us.
So it reactivates.
I just see it in my course, all this information that Anna is showing. So it is there.
Okay. So I think I could check Don't Show This Page Again, which means that if faculty have done the same thing, they can re-get it by going to About LockDown Browser on the right.
Okay. That's correct.
Okay.
For me, this is it's valuable information, especially because of that syllabus. It just gives you a nice place to start rather than trying to create an entirely new syllabus to address anything that might be new when you're giving a purely remote type of assessment. I also like this because it gives access to that documentation. Some faculty prefer something that they can hold in their hands as opposed to something that might be a video online. There's the video tutorial I did skip through, but this also, the last tutorial at the bottom, walks faculty through how to add the use of Monitor to their assessments. So these are just sort of backup pieces and hand-holding pieces that you might want to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of resources, one last thing to note, if you have new adjunct that have decided to or will be teaching moving forward, you also have a free training webinars that are available to you. These are available to you as part of your license because you are a LockDown Browser customer. There are no charges ever for the training webinars. So you do have some pointers and information that you can send faculty to. But once they actually have entrance into their dashboard, this probably looks very familiar to you just in terms of the types of, excuse me, the assessments themselves. But what Monitor will add is this last column here. Has Monitor been enabled on your server as yet?
It's there. As to whether it's enabled, I think it's shut down in the courses right now. I do see it, but it doesn't give me the, I do see it. So
okay.
It is there. I'm just not sure if we have it turned on so faculty can use it.
Okay. Well, once it's enabled, it does become available for faculty to use, but there might be a message that deters faculty from using it, and I'm going to walk you through those pieces right now. In terms of the assessment itself, once the instructor makes the decision on the assessment they want to use, they just simply click on the assessment, they select the option for settings, they add their LockDown Browser requirements, but then directly below, because the column for Monitor has been enabled, you can see here that the Monitor webcam settings also become available. So instructors have a couple of options that they can take advantage of here. if the goal is to have every instructor use Monitor and have all of the students take assessments remotely when they're using Monitor, you would select the option titled Require Respondus Monitor for this exam, because that means every student has the requirement to use Monitor. If you are allowing the student to decide which option they prefer, they can either use Respondus Monitor, take the assessment remotely, or they can come to a proctored lab and not use the webcam and take the assessment in the presence of a proctor. In this instance, they would still be using LockDown browser, but they would not be using, excuse me, the webcam. Now, in your particular situation, you're looking at requiring it across the board, correct?
We're looking at it for our hybrid courses. It's only going to be a few students per course who would be using this, the ones who are remote. Most of the other students would be in the room, and the faculty may or may not be using a Blackboard test with them, if that's going to vary.
Okay. So in the event that the student is taking the assessment remotely, or sort of in that scenario, you may want to consider having 2 different assessments available. Now, that would maybe require having a copy of the first assessment with maybe different delivery dates, if that's something that you're comfortable with, or you could allow either or. Now, the difference with either or, and I want to make sure I explain this, because if you decide to use either or rather, regardless of the option you select, this is the first thing that your faculty will see. This program dialog box is customizable. So this is something that you could, push out whatever information you need to faculty before they use Monitor. And I'll get back to this in a minute, but getting back to the either or option. If you decide to use either or, meaning the student gets to decide which option they prefer, then in that scenario, you'll need to make sure here where it says password, that you enter a password here. And then in the room where the student is not going to be using Monitor, so they're only going to be using LockDown browser, either the teacher or the testing center person will be acting as the proctor, the password that's entered here will need to be entered into the device that the student is using, and that's how LockDown browser knows to shut the requirement off for Monitor. So you never, ever want to give the student this password, because if you give the password to the student, they could give it to anyone else, and then it would only be a LockDown browser assessment. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in this scenario, regardless of the option that you select, for me, we're going to use Monitor across the board. You notice that there was that program dialog box. Now, that program dialog box is customizable by the folks at your institution that have admin and support level access to Respondus. So we're going to go into my instance of Respondus, because this might be something that you want to change. Now, the administrative area for me, once I'm in Monitor, there's a settings option. So this is a message to instructors when Respondus Monitor is enabled. So that message that you saw populate, this can be altered to reflect what you think is appropriate. So it's possible, if you're trying to restrict access to specific courses, you may be putting something here that explains that Respondus Monitor is an add-on feature for LockDown browser. It should only be used by these specific courses. If you're interested in using the application, please reach out to so-and-so. So depending on your need, that's something you should know that that's something you can customize, you can alter. And then that is the message that would display regardless of which option you elect to use. Now, once you select your option, you have here what we refer to as a startup sequence. Now, this is a series of optional events that the instructor gets to decide they want to use for the assessment. Now, you can see the webcam check is grayed out because the student must have a working webcam in order to use Monitor. But anything that has an edit text field next to it can be customized. It can either be customized by the faculty member, or if you have a specific program requirement that you would like to push out, that's something you can customize here. And then here in the settings area, you could customize it, you could lock the text, and this will push out your message. And then faculty are only checking boxes. So they're not changing the content in that situation. You've decided what you feel is appropriate, and that's what they will be using. But if you leave those boxes alone, then faculty can update this information as they see fit.
Can you have attachments there?
No, you cannot have attachments here.
But you can have attachments in the test itself, correct? So if it's a Blackboard test and we need to open an Excel document on the side, for example, can that be done?
So you can have an attachment, and the attachment would need to be included, for example, as either a PDF or it could even be a link to a website if you wanted to. You can include it as part of the assessment question. But you should be aware that in that scenario, the student's not going to be able to use a different application to perhaps figure out an equation or figure out an answer to a question and then come back and upload anything. So LockDown Browser will not allow the ability to use other applications during the assessment. If you want to take a student to a diagram, you want to take them to an Excel spreadsheet, if it's set up as a PDF or out on some website, you can do that. But they're not going to be able to manipulate that content.
Right, so that's going to limit the number of users that can use this product, because a lot of our faculty have, it's a lot of accounting tests and types of tests where they do have Excel sheets that the students work on during the exam. So that's just something to be aware of, that it will limit how many people can use this product.
Right, there is a spreadsheet tool that Respondus offers. I can send you links to that information, and you're welcome to take advantage of that tool, and that will allow you more flexibility. But you should be aware it is not Excel. So it's not going to work exactly the same.
Okay.
Okay? And I'll
so
follow up and I'll make sure
Anna, what would be the way around? If a portion of Excel needs to be presented during, so can it be an image inside?
Yep. I mean, you could certainly, from an image perspective, you could link to an image if you wanted to. And I can actually show you how this looks, but just in terms of the assessment itself, if you think about when you build the question, if you insert a hyperlink inside the question itself, that hyperlink can take you anywhere. It can take you to Google, Wikipedia. It could take you to a PDF that you created. It could take you to an instructor's own web page if you needed to. But once the student gets there, every live link on that page is going to be shut down. So it's going to be blocked so the student doesn't use that page as a springboard to any other content.
Yeah, and I'm giving examples where the students need to use Excel. They might need to be putting in formulas and calculating things. It's not just a question of looking at an Excel sheet, but there are test examples in which they need the use of Excel for the mathematical features.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a difference. I mean, certainly there's a difference between presenting static documentation versus allowing the student to actually manipulate content. Now, it's the manipulation of content because many of those products, and just to be perfectly clear, the reason why we can't allow the use of an application like Excel or Word, for example, those applications have the ability for the student to create web pages within the application itself. And that would allow the student a backdoor to exit your assessment so that they could navigate anywhere else to search for content. And that's really where the issue comes into play. But I'm happy to follow up with that spreadsheet tool information if that's something that you think might be useful.
Does it do rudimentary calculations? Average?
I'm sorry, I can't.
We're not hearing you.
I'm sorry. My own. No. Does it do mathematical?
No, you're cutting out.
Sure. Is it possible? I mean, you're welcome to chat a message into the chat room for GoToMeeting, and I'm happy to read the question out loud. That might be a little bit easier.
Oh. Sorry.
Now, there is also a way to whitelist certain pages. Typically, we only recommend doing that within the LockDown browser environment, and I can actually show you where that lives. Does it do math calculations equals sum equals averages? We have a scientific calculator that you may be able to take advantage of some of that functionality, and I'm happy certainly to send you more information on that as well. There's a scientific calculator and a standard calculator that's built into LockDown browser, and actually let me see here. So here under LockDown browser settings, under advanced settings, now, also worth mentioning, there's an area here that allows access to specific external web domains. So you could enter specific web domains here, and you could have access to those pages. But again, it's going to allow you access to specific pages, but it's going to limit what you can work with within those pages. This was primarily developed for web-based ebooks. And Deborah was asking, in my response to Deborah's question, which was, does it do math calculations equals sum equals averages? And that's something certainly you could try with a calculator and see if it works and it provides you with the functionality that you need. Now, it's probably worth mentioning that once the student is taking their assessment, one of the options that I do see quite a few math departments taking advantage of is when they're building their assessment, they might allow the student the ability to use scratch paper. So the ability for them to write on a piece of paper what their calculations are, any or answers to specific questions. In that specific instance, many of the same faculty, when they build their assessments, they may build into their assessment block of questions things like, please show me at specific times in the assessment, now that you've answered this question, please show me your paper. Hold it up to the webcam so that I can see the work that you've done. Now, when you use that within the framework of randomization of questions and question blocks, it's going to appear as a different question depending on the student who's taking the assessment. So it's not going to appear always for question 5 or always for question 6. It's going to depend on how you set up your blocks. And that would be the Blackboard functionality. Those same institutions, if they're using Monitor, they may wait till you get to the end of the assessment and then say, the last question might be, now show us the completed paper with all of your work so that it's presented for the webcam. The last question, when you're working with it in that manner, that makes sense as well because from a faculty perspective, that allows you to go back and look at the video content, and you can always look at the very last thumbnail and grab the video from that point forward if that's something you wanted to check. So it's going to display in the same place every time, that last completed piece of paper. And this will actually make more sense when I show you the video content on the back end. Now, once the additional instructions are completed, again, if this is something you wanted to customize, you could enter it here, save it and close it. You could lock the text. And Molly is just asking that whoever is typing, if you could please mute your mic so that it's not something that the rest of the room is hearing. Now, from the additional instructions perspective, once this has been completed, again, you could lock your text if you prefer, or you could leave it so that faculty have an opportunity to answer questions to enter this information as they see fit, perhaps customizing it for their specific class. Now, the guidelines and tips, this will allow, this is basically something that we built that allows you the ability, the student the ability to see different prompts that will allow them to create a better quality video for you. So in this instance, you can see that we're asking students to avoid rooms where children and other people are present, turn off television, run the system and webcam check, and these are just pointers so that students are in a better place in terms of the quality of the video content that they provide you. Now, the student photo, this is something you could add as a requirement. You could request the student show an ID. If it is a hybrid course, it's possible the student certainly would have a digital ID available for your institution. But for some purely online courses, that may not be available. So depending on what your preferences are, again, if you have a specific policy that you'd like to use, that's something here that you could edit the default text, and it might say, always, please show your student ID for Bentley University. You could lock the text, save it, and then the instructor simply comes in and just checks the box. The environment video can also be customized. So for me, mine's pretty basic. Please show your area around your computer. Make sure it's clear of papers, books, phones. Click Start Recording. Slowly tilt pan your webcam. In your environment, you might be a little bit more specific. It's possible if you're using an external webcam, you might make it a requirement the student show their hands and face in the frame at all times. I find that the environment check tends to be a little bit more specific to the type of assessment that you're giving. Now, the facial detection check, you'll notice that this box is unchecked because with facial detection, Monitor makes it a requirement that the student passes an initial facial detection check before they're allowed access to the assessment itself. Now, if you feel that's too stringent, under the options for facial detection, you can uncheck the box, and this will allow the student to enter the assessment. Most institutions will leave this as is. The next option allows you to notify students during an exam if face cannot be detected. So this basically is prompting the student if they move out of frame. And again, the premise is to provide you with the best quality video that the student can. Once the instructor has added all their requirements, they simply click Save and Close. Adding the requirements for Monitor, took me probably about 5 to 7 minutes to walk you through the additional features and functionality, show you where some of the adjustments are made. And many faculty, once they've used the application once or twice, especially depending on what customizations you may have made for them and what you may have locked up for text, they rarely spend more than a minute to a minute and a half in that area. But you'll notice that once I have added my requirements, it comes up as being required, both LockDown Browser and the webcam, and that both columns show up as required. Are there any questions for me on adding the requirements?
No, Anna, could you maybe delve a little bit into, I don't know, you may be going to do this already anyway, but how, once these requirements are set and students take the test, how the system actually does the monitoring, since it's automated?
Absolutely, and we'll show that now. I mean, what you really...
Just a second before you, and a question. Can you set up requirements and then deploy them to all courses, or choose subset of courses, or it needs to be done course by course?
Sure, it must be done course by course, but then once the requirements have been added to the course itself, for example, if you're moving from one semester to the next semester and you're copying that course, right, all the requirements would be moved over to the next course for the next term. So you don't have to add all the requirements again from term to term, but initially you are adding the requirements to the course. Now the caveat to that is when you do a course copy, you need to make sure that you open the LockDown Browser dashboard at least once. You don't have to open up every test, just the dashboard. Opening the dashboard moves over all of the assessment requirements, very similar to LockDown Browser. As long as you open this dashboard once, everything will copy over. If you ever see a fix-it error, you will know immediately that that dashboard was not opened once the course was copied and before students began taking assessments. That's the #1 tell, is the fix-it error. But from the perspective of assessments that have already been given, and you'll notice here, this assessment, Geography Midterm Exam on Flags, this is one that has been completed. And now that it's been completed, you see that there's an option that will populate titled Class Results. Now the Class Results option, this is going to populate with a dashboard, and the dashboard will give you the name. It's basically giving you a course roster. It's giving you the names of all the students in your course that have completed the assessment. In addition, there's a review priority system, and the review priority system is based on facial detection. So it's identifying 3 key factors: whether or not the student who started the assessment is still taking the assessment. So again, if it's a different student that is now taking the assessment, it will identify if the student is missing from the frame at any point, and it will also identify if there are multiple students in the frame, or multiple people in the frame, I should say. It's also looking at a couple of other things as well. So things like whether or not the student is engaged in the use of combination keystrokes will elevate the priority level the student falls into. And there are a number of other exploits as well. There's a link here that walks through how priority is determined, and we'll give more information as well. I can definitely follow up with that link if you'd like to take a closer look. It's populating here. You can see it's rating the specific videos, and it's rating them in order of high, medium, or low priority. And the goal is to give you a sampling of videos as opposed to having any faculty member review 50 videos. It is automated proctoring, and it is based on that facial detection. Many faculty, when they're using this application, I think the right approach in thinking about what the application does is that it is built to provide you with a deterrent. It's built to provide you with more information on this particular assessment and more security. So often faculty will look at the ratings, but they're also interested in seeing the date the student completed the assessment, the score, and the duration. Sometimes they may be comparing one student with another score to see if perhaps maybe they have 2 or 3 students with the same score. In this particular instance, this is a geography midterm. So looking at a midterm, it's unlikely a midterm would be finished in 18 minutes. So it's really kind of a combination of different things that you might be looking at. It's pulling the grades from your grade center. Now also, in terms of the particular student assessment, I do want to open up the assessment. So if you need to take a closer look at any particular assessment, this is a high rating The score might seem a little unusual. The duration definitely seems unusual. If you want to take a closer look, faculty just simply click on the plus, and this is going to load that video content for you. You'll notice that there's a flash requirement here. Now, flash is being end of life, and I believe it's 15 months from now. But Respondus is on track for a solution, to have a solution in place by the end of this term, the end of this fall term. So you should see a change in how that's being provided. Now, in terms of opening up the assessment itself, we're taking a closer look. You can see here that within the assessment, this large video box, this is going to allow me the ability to watch any of the infractions and also even the video itself if I wanted to take a closer look. You'll notice in the top right-hand corner, it's just giving me a high-level overview of what might have happened during the assessment. The student was tagged with 6 flags for a total of a little over 6 minutes. They only achieved facial detection for 61% of the assessment, so it looks like we might have some problems here. You'll notice there are date timestamps here. So if I wanted to click on the date timestamp and watch the video from that point forward, I absolutely could. The application also records ambient audio. If I wanted to back it up a little bit, maybe see a little bit more of what might have happened, I can. If I wanted to look at a different flag, I can absolutely scroll through and look at any of the flags that were captured during the session. Now, the application records the entire assessment, but one other piece I do want to show you while we're here, there's a milestones option. Now, the milestones option allows me to look at question by question how much time the student spent on any specific question. So if there are any concerns about specific students who seem to have the same scores, this is something I might also be taking a closer look at. Also important to mention that from a flagging perspective, LockDown Browser will also flag, and Monitor will flag whether or not an internet disruption occurred. Monitor would automatically try to reconnect for a period of up to 3 minutes. So it will provide you with date timestamps that will indicate whether or not the student's internet connection dropped. And certainly will show you that attempts to reconnect will also be date timestamped. So it lends a little bit more credibility to the student who's telling you, well, my internet connection dropped and I wasn't able to finish the assessment. Monitor will also record whether or not the student tries to manually disconnect or connect a webcam. So that's something that would be captured, but that's kind of an interesting one for me because always you will see, in addition to the flag for it, the student will be recorded doing exactly that. So occasionally an instructor will call and say, hey, you know, we caught my first student cheating. I saw them on camera trying to disconnect the webcam, because students will forget that they're actually being recorded. Now, a couple of other things I do want to make mention of. If you look directly below, in addition to the video content and the flags here, you'll see that there are a number of thumbnails that are generated. Now, the thumbnails initially will correspond to how we set up our assessment. If you have digital photos available for your students, you can work with our IT team to upload those for the purposes of comparison, but they can be compared to the student photo that was taken, the ID the student presented, the environment video itself. If I wanted to watch the student's environment video, I click on the thumbnail and I can watch it in its entirety. Make sure that they followed my instructions clearly. Now, the pre-exam thumbnail, this bridges the gap between the time the student completed their environment check and the time they hit start on their assessment. So if this is something I wanted to watch, perhaps the student has multiple flags, maybe I want to come back and check this and see what they did after they completed their environment video. If I wanted to watch the entire, if I only decided I wanted to maybe look at a thumbnail, I see something unusual, I can also do that. So you do have access to the videos for a period of up to 5 years, and we selected that 5-year time frame because it typically carries a student through the length of matriculation at any university. The videos are stored on our cloud servers through Amazon Web Services. And from a security perspective, the application was built with FERPA in mind. So if you're thinking about, just even access to the LMS and access to the video content, the only people that would have access to the video content would be the instructor that has rights to the course, and then also your LMS administrators that have rights to the LMS. Now, that front end is required in terms of access to the course itself in order to even access the video content. And the video content, again, is stored separately. Now, if there's some type of an infraction, and if you required a one-time download for the videos, that's something that would need to be requested by the registered contacts for your institution. And that's done really to protect the institution, because you would have everything logged and you would know exactly who requested the video. So there's never a question as to who's looking at the video content. Now, you'll notice here that when we're walking through this, some of you may be familiar with, may have seen one of our training sessions before. This is Ari Sauer. She's one of our senior product specialists. I'm not actually looking at any student information, because even here at Respondus, if you were to call me and say, Anna, can you take a look at this video? The answer would be absolutely not. It's not something we can ever look at, because we do not have access to any of your student information. Are there any questions for me on the back end in terms of what is captured for Respondus Monitor or the video content? And I'm sorry, if somebody in the room can confirm if you're still on the webinar, I would appreciate it.
We are here. It's very clear. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I wasn't quite sure.
Definitely.
I lost my GoToMeeting box for a second, so I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't talking with the group not being there.
No, we are listening. Everything is clear.
Okay. Are there any questions for me on the video content on the back end?
Yes. Is it possible to have a live person to watch the students while they're taking an exam?
It is not possible with Respondus Monitor. We do not offer a live proctoring option, only the asynchronous proctoring.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions I can answer? Okay.
Yeah, so this is a little bit out of order, but I have a question about the seats, that we have 200 seats available. What does a seat mean? Is that one exam, one student, or 1 hour, or how much is one seat?
No, so a seat is defined as one student enrolled in one course with unlimited testing in that course. So the goal with the seat model is to allow students an opportunity, once they're in your course, to take as many assessments as possible with the application during the course of the term. So if you're considering using this, say, for a course that has 40 or 50 students, they can take an unlimited number of assessments, and they really truly have only used the one seat. We do offer some licensing models that they're really, really scalable if you're looking at larger numbers. But initially for a trial, I would always recommend using the seats, because if you think about how a student might take an assessment, if they're enrolled in a course, they may have 3 or 4 assessments that they're taking in that course, or possibly even more. In fact, the average for our institutions falls somewhere between 6 and 7 assessments per course where they're using Monitor. So this allows you week-over-week testing with that student, and it does allow you quite a bit of context. In fact, often faculty will come in, they'll start with maybe a practice test, and I do recommend always giving a practice test with this type of technology just to make sure everything is working properly, because it gives you a chance to come in, take a look at those videos, and see what you might like to even in fact change. Some faculty will come in, they'll audit a few assessments and say, you know, it looks good, everything looks fine, but maybe I want to tighten up my instructions. Maybe there's something I see a couple of students doing that maybe if I change my instructions might tighten up the environment and give me a better quality video. A good example of that is before we created the tips and feedback that the students walk through, some instructors would come back and say, you know, I noticed we have students that are wearing baseball caps, and because of it, I can't really get a good look at their face. So they were changing their instructions to reflect that, asking students not to wear caps when they take assessments. Now, what I find many faculty do, they'll come in, they might audit that practice test or the week 1 quiz, then they may come back and audit a midterm or a final. And then once they're auditing that midterm or final, if they see something that seems unusual, they can go back and look at week 1, week 2, week 3, or week 4. It is giving them more context to make a decision based on whether or not they feel there's truly cheating or maybe something a little bit more innocent. Really good example of that, I've had a couple of schools that will, when they're piloting the application, I had one school in Michigan that came back and said, you know, we tried it in a psychology class and we thought, you know, we saw some unusual things. It wasn't cheating. They had one student that was taking
quite a bit of time to take assessments remotely, and even it was taking them longer to take assessments remotely than in proctored labs, and they couldn't figure out why. When they went back to look at their remote assessments, it turns out the student has small children. So they could actually see the student's children kind of climbing their legs saying, hey, you know, can you get me this, or can you help me with this? And it just wasn't a good situation, wasn't a good environment for them to take tests. So they actually went back to that student because it wasn't a cheating situation. It was an intervention. And they recommended that student take their assessments in proctored labs, that they felt they would be more focused in that situation.
Okay. And do you have any local schools that are using this right now?
Sure. So in terms of schools, I know UMass Boston is using the application, and they're using the 200 free seats. They're in the middle of their trial right now, and they are planning to convert on August 31st.
So right now, if we want to use the seats, we don't need to do anything, right? The students will just access the test, and the system will just automatically how many individual students have accessed the test?
Right. What's really nice for you is from an administrative perspective, the way the application's been built, in that same admin area where you can access the settings and make any updates, there's also a reporting link. So you'll be able to see how many courses have used the application, how many sessions, how many seats have been used. In my environment, what you're seeing here is not going to look exactly the same. I am limited with what my view is, and again, kind of going back to FERPA and other pieces. But for you, you'll be able to see what server, which courses, depending on how your server is set up, you'll be able to see the instructor that's using the application. There's also a way to show activated seats. So if you wanted to see which students activated seats, you absolutely could. So this will give you quite a bit of information. We have a lot of schools that will use this reporting functionality really to determine what their needs for online proctoring are, and then also to think a little bit more about budget and any next steps they want to take. I personally, this is one of my favorite parts because I think sometimes when you think about faculty who might express an interest in piloting an application, I have schools that will say, we have a dozen instructors that definitely want to use something. Then they come back later and they say, you know, we're not really sure who used it. So this is a great way to say, okay, well, we saw that 6 people used it or 8 people used it. And then you can go back and you can also always audit them and see, you know, what was your experience like? This will just give you more information on what actually happened during that trial. And that's available to the admins of the license. So whoever's listed as your registered contacts can easily come in any time of the day and night, take a look at that, and that will give you latest and greatest information as to how many seats were used and which courses were using it. So Deborah is asking if the seat count resets after each term. And it doesn't reset after each term. It will reset at the beginning of the licensing term. So right now, as of 8/1, your institution has access to 200 seats because that was your licensing term date, start date. So if you were to use all 200 seats by 7/31, then on 8/1 of the following license term, they'll reset to 200. Are there any other questions for me?
Yes, I have a question. If we set a course and everyone on our team will be using and recording and monitor just to test it, can you reset seats manually to remove us as administrators who just play with the software in case case real instructors will use those seats in their classes?
Right. I wouldn't be able to reset the seats, but if you knew that you needed, say, 200 seats, for example, strictly for student usage, and then you had a handful, maybe 4 or 5 students, 4 or 5 instructors that logged in and were using it from the student perspective, if you could let me know how many instructors you had using the application, I'm sure our team could give you maybe an extra 5 seats or 10 seats if need be, but I really can't extend it beyond, say, maybe 10 seats.
Now that would be enough because there's only 3 or 4 of us in the department who might play with it, maybe a faculty member or 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Just if you could let me know what that number officially would be, then I'm sure we could do something for that.
Once we run into problems that we exceed the number of seats, then we will worry about it. But we just wanted to know if it's possible.
You know, the licensing options, it's probably worth mentioning, but again, certainly you're not even close to that place yet. But just so that you're aware of what that would look like, let me just take you back real quick. We have a student purchase model that's very, very attractive. If you don't have an aversion to an online student paying a fee, what's nice about this is that a lot of proctoring companies will charge a per assessment fee when you're using their proctoring service. Monitor is not a per assessment fee for student purchase. The way Monitor works is the student purchases a seat with Respondus. They pay $15 to Respondus, and it allows them a 365-day subscription to using the application in as many courses and for as many assessments as your institution is using it for. So it's a new model. It's particularly nice and very, very scalable and very, very inexpensive for the student.
That's great. That's great
Yeah.
to know. That's
Yeah.
And how do they pay for this?
So the payment can be made, it's made directly to Respondus, either by credit card, debit card, we even accept PayPal. So they pay for it once. And for example, in your particular online group, if the student takes 3 or 4 courses, and those courses may give 3 or 4 assessments, it's that one $15 fee for 365 days. And it covers them for all their courses, all their assessments. Now, there's also an institution option. Yeah, there's an institution option, but again, it's for me, starting with student purchase, if that's something that's acceptable to a school, that's a really nice place to start.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Anything else I can cover for you for Monitor? Okay. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions. At this point, certainly, I'm happy to stop the recording and certainly can send you a web link for that as well. It'll be a link to my YouTube channel, and that will give you access to the recording. You're welcome to forward it to other instructors who might have an interest in looking at it. If there are any follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to email me. You're welcome to call me. Anything I can help with, I'm happy to do. If you do decide to move forward with trying the application, I'm happy to provide a little bit more of an instructor type of training. This was more giving you, here's how the application works. We can walk through the student's perspective on how they use the application, or really answer any other faculty-facing questions that you might have. But please let me know what your need looks like and how I can best assist you.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right,
It's my
Thanks,
pleasure.
Anna.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Bye-bye. Very good. And
Excellent. Thank you.
informative.